All right, listeners. So tonight, this is episode 4 of the BLC, the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. And before I hit the intro, just wanted to let you know kind of what the episode was going to be going over. And more than anything, I'm going to be taking this time to introduce a guest who will be appearing on this podcast quite regularly. He's my good friend Cooper, and he happens to be a Bigfoot enthusiast like myself. Has always been attracted to the subject of Sasquatch and everything about it. So we're going to start off with the intro for those who aren't familiar with the podcast and then jump right into it. So my question for all the Bigfoot believers and skeptics alike is this. How do you reconcile the fact that literally every culture in the world today has legends and connections to the creature we often refer to as Bigfoot, dating back to the dawn of time? Is this just coincidence, or is it something more? Why do all the stories contain the same recurring descriptions and themes? Whether they call them Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti, Yeren, Skunk Ape, Yowie, or some other name, the reports are all the same. From America to China, the Himalayas to Australia, literally every continent has the same phenomenon. Why do we see such similarities? How could this story permeate throughout the entire globe? Is there definitive proof of the existence of Bigfoot? That's what I'm on a mission to figure out. Join me as we uncover the stories, the evidences, and the unbelievable yet true events that have occurred all throughout the world. My goal is to turn skeptics into believers, and believers into knowers. I'm Riley Woolner, and welcome to the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast. All right, listeners, so for tonight's episode 4 of the Bigfoot Legends and Connections podcast, I'm bringing on my good buddy Cooper, who's also a Bigfoot enthusiast, and he's going to be my future occasional co-host. So, Cooper, welcome on to the show, man.
Hey, Riley, thanks for having me. I'm excited for our future episodes and getting this thing going.
Yeah, man, I am too. So, for the audience listening, just wanted to ask, who are you? Where are you from? Where do you live? Just give them a little basic background about yourself before we jump into the whole Bigfoot scene.
Yeah, just briefly, my name's Cooper. I'm from Dallas, Oregon, so same town as Riley. We now live up here in Seattle, Washington, but grew up down in Oregon and lived there most of my life. I've only been up here for about a year. Spent 2 years up in Alaska, and then about 6 months in Utah. So kind of been all over the place the last little bit, but that's where we're at now up here in Seattle area. So right next to about 2 hours from Mount Rainier, an hour and a half from the Olympic National Forest. So we're kind of in the thick of it. Yeah,
for those who are unfamiliar with the geography there, Cooper's living in one of the most gorgeous parts of the United States. Definitely a super cool part of the Pacific Northwest. So, Cooper, how did you get into Sasquatch? Let's jump into it.
Yeah. So, in high school, actually, I don't even know. It was probably before high school. I've always thought Bigfoot was kind of a fun idea. At least back then, it was just kind of like this, most people don't believe in Bigfoot, but, I think it's out there kind of thing. Didn't really do a whole lot of research into it. I had read some, online articles about it or people's experiences on the Oregon Bigfoot website. But at the time, I only read a couple of them, and I spent a lot of time fishing and stuff over on the Siuslaw National Forest area, Western Oregon, in the mountain range, and I'd go up mountain biking. Riley mentioned Black Rock in the first one. I'd go up there sometimes, and so sometimes by myself, and some of these people's encounters freaked me out a little bit, so I stopped reading them because I was like, I just want to enjoy the woods right now and not have to even think about a hairy giant running around through the forest. So
I know me and plenty of the other listeners can probably relate to that.
Yeah. I hadn't really spent a lot of time doing any research. I was up in Alaska for a couple years and ran into a couple people who had some kind of experiences or found footprints, and so my interest is still there, but it kind of was just, I never really talked to as many people as I wish I would have at this point about it, because I feel like I ran into so many people, a lot of Native Americans, and could have gotten like their take on Bigfoot and things, but it wasn't really on my mind while I was there. And then a couple months back, I started getting into it again, and now here we are, and I've got my opinions and thoughts on Bigfoot have gone all over the place, and I now have opinions and believe things about Sasquatch that I thought sounded absurd when I first started looking into it, but now I'm like, it actually makes sense. So that's kind of how I've gotten into it, and being here in Washington, there's lots of areas to go explore and stuff, which I'm excited to get to this summer.
Right on, man. Yeah. And for those listening who don't know, Samuel is Cooper's little brother, and he was good buddies with Dalton, my little brother, who the audience heard about in the last episode, who was with me during our encounter there in Oregon, or at least our perceived encounter. And when Samuel had heard that story, he told it to Cooper here, and Cooper reached out to me probably, how many months ago you think, man?
Let's see. It was probably back in, I want to say
November, yeah. So not too long ago,
maybe
actually.
October.
Yeah, October, like, 2 or 3 months ago or so. And yeah, he reached out to me and he was just like, hey, dude, I heard you and Dalton had a Bigfoot story out in the forest there in Oregon. And I was like, yeah, man. And I let him know. And ever since then, we had been communicating online, just sending each other audios through Facebook Messenger while we've both been at work, just pretty much talking all about the whole subject, going all over the map as far as the weird stuff, the cool stories, everything. So it was one of the reasons why I was like, man, Cooper is the one who I want to have as my my future occasional co-host on this thing. So Cooper, what are some of the, if you don't mind telling us, do you have a couple stories that for you were compelling enough to keep you interested in the subject, possibly ones that like are from people you know personally?
Yeah. I don't really have like personal experiences where I per se saw one. I have had, let's see. All right, you might have to cut some of this stuff out, Riley.
No worries.
I'm trying to think.
What about the one with your uncle or your dad or whatever, and the one with the tractor or whatever? I think I remember you telling me about, where it spoke.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll tell that one. I have the one from my mission where I was talking to the dude about the footprint next to his tractor out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, I'll start with that one. Okay. When I was in Alaska, there was a guy that I ran into, and I have two different Alaska people I talked to in Alaska about this. One person in particular, this is when I was in Nome, which is, if anyone knows where Nome's at, it's far west Alaska. The only way to get there is by boat or plane, but no one goes there by boat from what I know. There's an airport there, and that's where everyone comes and goes into the village out there. It only has about 3,000 people. And one of the guys we talked to, he was a road grader, so he had this big tractor that he would use to basically mix up the gravel on the road so that it gets its traction back again. And so he was telling us, so there's a really small village between Nome, or it's like 70 miles north of Nome across the little peninsula area over the tundra, and it's 70 miles away over these gravel roads, so it takes like 2 hours to drive out there or more, depending on how fast you're driving, but it's gravel, so you kind of have to go slow. And he works on said he was out there. He'd have to drive out to his road grader every day when he was using it. And he said one day he went out there and he was going to get into his road grader, and below it was a huge footprint in the mud. And this was a native guy, and a lot of Native Americans, or most Native Americans, have some form or belief of Sasquatch or some kind of wild man, hairy person, hairy ape-like thing. So that one piqued my interest. This was a guy I believed. I didn't think he was trying to pull my leg or anything. And then talking to more people up there in Alaska, I did have a few people I talked to. I wish I'd asked way more, but one of the guys was telling me that, because I think I had told him up to this point about this other guy's experience with the footprint. He was telling me that up there, that from what he understood about the Native Americans' beliefs, because he'd heard stories about children getting kidnapped by Bigfoot and being taken to caves, and he mentioned mind speak or telepathy type stuff, which at the time, that stuff sounded absolutely crazy to me. I'm like, there's no way, like, it's just a great ape, North America, no one's found it yet, that's all it is. So that was probably one of the first times I'd ever heard any of the paranormal type supernatural things related to Sasquatch, and it sounded crazy to me. And then talking to my dad, he had a buddy call him up one day when he was in his early 20s, and he said, dude, my brother just had the craziest experience. So, and I don't remember where he lived exactly. Basically, this was another tractor story. So his brother went out to a field where he was baling the big round bales of hay.
Where was this, so Cooper?
I'm not sure exactly where this was, to be honest.
Do you think it was in the Northwest, in Oregon or Washington, or somewhere else?
I want to say it was somewhere else.
Okay.
Yeah, Midwest, somewhere. I'm not really sure. So these big round bales of hay, they're huge. I can't remember how much they weigh, but from what I've seen and heard, they're huge. They weigh a lot. They'd be hard to move by hand, like for a human to go up and move them around. So he said he went out to the tractor and the bales of hay had been moved around, and he's like, oh, that's not where I left things. And then he saw this person messing with the tractor, and he's like, what the heck is going on? And then all of a sudden, this guy, who he thought was a guy, came running up to the side of his truck and tried opening up the door. And he said the guy had bright blue eyes, but he was covered in hair, and he tried driving off, and the dude kept up with him. He was driving like 25 miles an hour, and this thing was just running alongside of his car. And whatever his name was, he just kept saying, "Are you scared yet?" And that's all. That's as much as my dad can remember of the story. So that one, it sounds crazy. But my dad then again said, I don't think my friend was trying to pull my leg, like there'd be no reason to, nor his brother. But yeah, that was another one that my dad's told for a really long time.
That one, dude, is always fascinated me because ever since I've heard you tell it, just because for the audience, I'm sure most, if you're already into the whole Sasquatch phenomenon, then you've probably heard of the Sierra sounds recorded by Ron Moorhead up in the Sierra Nevadas in California. And for those who haven't heard about that, it's basically these recordings that were made in the 70s of these Bigfoot, allegedly Bigfoot voices, making all kinds of hoops and hollers and kind of monkey sounding noises,
but then also there's some kind of chatter that's come to be colloquially known as like a samurai chatter amongst the whole Bigfoot enthusiast community. And there was Scott Nelson was his name. He was a cryptolinguist for the military, who claims that if you slow down that audio, you can hear that they are speaking some kind of language. And so for those who are already into the whole Bigfoot thing, there is evidence for Bigfoot being able to vocalize beyond just animal noises and to have some kind of language. And that goes along with the theory that Cooper and I are a little bit more in favor of as far as what Sasquatch is, that there's more of a human component. And we'll get more into that in future episodes. But basically, why I've liked that story of yours is that that's one of the first times I had ever heard of Sasquatch speaking not just a language, but speaking English, saying, what was it? Are you scared yet? Right? Is what he...
Yeah, and maybe, thinking about it, maybe it wasn't even speaking to him. Maybe it was using some kind of mind connection. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and that's another thing that we'll be able to spend a future episode talking more about. But, for the audience listening, that is definitely something that gets reported with people's encounters with Bigfoot, is that they somehow are able to communicate a thought of sentence or something to the person who has encountered the Bigfoot, and it's become known to be called mind speak. And similar to Cooper, who mentioned this, I thought it was crazy when I first heard about that. I always would disregard it, but since that time, I've done a lot more research and heard a lot more stories and have become much more comfortable with the whole idea of it. So yeah, that's super fascinating. The other part that I find really cool about that story, dude, is the fact that it straight up said he had blue eyes.
Yeah, I haven't heard that too many times. Most of the time people talk about big black eyes, or, they kind of glowed red a little bit when the light was reflecting off of them.
Yeah, I've heard the, glowing red before, and I've definitely heard of them having very dark eyes. But yeah, I hadn't ever heard of them having blue eyes before. It makes me wonder about, and we can, like I said, probably have another episode specifically on the theory what our theory as to what these things are. But it does make me wonder if like some of them are a little more human-like, and maybe that was one of them. It still maintained some of the more human elements, such as blue eyes. But then again, I mean, it's not just humans that have blue eyes. I mean, cats and some dogs have blue eyes,
Right.
and there's also plenty of humans without blue eyes. In fact, blue eyes is a very rare trait. It's just that when I think of, a human-like figure like Bigfoot and having blue eyes, for whatever reason, that makes me think that it might be, it might have more of a human side to it or something. But I might be just completely wrong now that I think about it. But yeah, that's super interesting. So yeah, those your stories up in Alaska, along with that one that your dad told you, kind of have been some of the ones that you yourself have kind of been able to hear from people right?
Right, yeah. Yeah, as far as people I know, I might be forgetting one. But yeah, off the top of my head, those are the ones I can remember.
Yeah. Well, they're solid accounts, man. And like you said, I was thinking about this when you were talking about the story of the guy who's claimed that he saw a huge footprint. To me, that's just, it's not too crazy of a story. And so it doesn't really feel like if it was to be a prank, why not go all out? You know what I mean? Like, if he was going to prank you, don't you think that he would have come up with some more outlandish claims rather than just, yeah, I saw this big footprint in the ground. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and the reason I explained where I was at too, and I forgot to mention this, was because Nome is 70 miles south of where this happened at. And between Nome and Taylor, which is the village up there, there's literally nothing. There's a road, and that's it. There's no buildings. Well, there's a couple old gold mining shacks from a long time ago that are just kind of off the road. But other than that, there's no towns, nothing. The only reason to go out there is to go to Taylor, There's some like little creeks and rivers out there, but I think the village itself, Teller, only has like 300 people or something. It's pretty small.
Wow.
So there's really no reason to drive the 70 miles out there. So I just thought it was interesting that where his stuff was parked, being so remote out there, that happened. Which, I mean, really, it could have been someone pranking him.
Sure, but like what a weird.
Likelihood of it.
Yeah, like sure, like what a weird prank to pull. Like, hey, I'm gonna step my bare foot down in the mud next to this guy's tractor and move his stuff around. Like, that seems like a very poorly thought out prank that, you know, is it really going to be that funny when he comes back and you're hidden in the bushes with the camera? Like, I don't know. Like,
right.
Maybe some people are, you know, really get into that, but I don't know too many people who do. So, and just like you said, the fact that that part of Alaska, like most of Alaska, is so remote and so like inaccessible other than, you know, unless you are kind of an animal of sorts or wild in some way, you're probably not going to get around that easily, you know?
Yeah.
So now my question for you, dude, is have you had any experiences out in the wilderness yourself that have been reminiscent of the Bigfoot, you know, phenomenon? I know you already mentioned that you've never actually seen one yourself, but have you ever had something that you've been like, hey, you know what, that might have been some Sasquatch activity?
Yeah. I have spent a lot of time. There is a reservoir outside of Dallas too.
Dallas, Oregon, by the way, people who are listening, not Dallas, Texas.
Not Texas. I've had several times where I've been out by myself, and you get like that creeped out feeling like something's watching you. Obviously, like that could have just been just a feeling, or maybe a mountain lion was out there, or who knows what. And without going back in time and like knowing the stuff I know now about the different like traits of an encounter with the Sasquatch and things, it would be too hard to say if I've ever had any prior to this point. But a few weeks ago, or I guess it was in December, so it was a couple months ago, or last month. I was with a couple of friends. We were gonna go we're trying to get up to a lake. This is on the south or the southeast side of Mount Rainier National Park, around Crystal Mountain Resort. And
which is up in Washington.
Up in Washington. We were gonna go up to Crystal Lake, and we were snowshoeing, but we hadn't been snowshoeing the whole time that I haven't been snowshoeing before, and neither had anyone else. And it was a little warmer that day than we thought it was going to be, so the snow was pretty heavy, and none of us had been prepared for the kind of workout it was going to be to hike up in the snow. And we got pretty tired, so we ended up cutting our hike short by like 4 or 5 miles one way. So in total, we ended up cutting it short like 8 miles or something. We were all whooped after like a mile or two of a walk, as embarrassing as that is to say. But we cut it short. We went down to this little river, and we're gonna end up camping down there for the night. And I can't remember what river it was. It was really pretty though, really quiet that day. Two of the guys weren't super prepared. They got a little wet and decided they didn't really want to stay the night. So I want to say it was around like 3 or 4, just about when it starts getting dark, we decided to pack up and walk out. And I knew we were going to end up walking back in the dark at that point because it got dark at like 4:30. So if we left at 4, we were going to hit dark because we were only going to be walking for around an hour and a half-ish to get out of there. So we had once we decided to pack up, we had about an hour hike out in the dark. We're in Mount Rainier National Forest, National Park, which is one of the areas in the country that's pretty well known for Bigfoot encounters and Bigfoot sightings. And then it was dark out. So there's a couple of things that were, there were some things there that I knew in my mind, because we kind of joked about it that we were going to go out and find Bigfoot, and if we had stayed out and camped over the night, I'm sure we would have sat outside by like a fire and maybe sat and listened and anything like that. But we ended up cutting it short. So that was on my mind, and I don't know how much the other guys are into the idea of Bigfoot, or if they just think it's kind of a fun idea or more of like a joke. I'm not really sure. But we're walking out. Oh, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. So we're walking out. It gets dark, and probably like 15 minutes or 20 minutes after it gets dark, we can't see anything without our flashlights or headlamps on. We hear this loud tree snap, and it sounded like thunder to me. It was so loud. The whole hike up, we didn't hear any trees break. We spent more time hiking up than we did going back. No trees breaking. Another thing I remember about that day as well is that there was no animals around. I didn't hear any birds. Obviously, it's snowing out. There's gonna be no like crickets or anything like that. But there's no birds, nothing like that. It was just like dead quiet all day. The hike out was the same way. It was just super, super quiet. And I know snow does muffle sound a little bit and make it kind of you don't hear stuff as much because the snow kind of acts as a sound absorber. And then so we hear that first snap, and so when we're leaving the trail, off to our right is Crystal Mountain Resort, up the mountain a ways, the resorts up there. And then off to our left would be just like open forest for like miles and miles and miles. So nothing out there except forest. That's the side of the road we heard the tree break on. Probably like 10 minutes later, another one goes off, snap. And during the time, I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. Like, I've never heard a tree break before. And both of them were like super loud, sounded like thunder. And it wasn't until afterwards, me and Riley were talking about it. And I was like, that's kind of odd that the trees broke. Like, what? I don't know how often trees break because of the snow. It was just weird that they both broke on the side of the road that's not by the resort, so kind of more wilderness area. After it got dark, because we didn't hear anything like that on the way up. Nothing really changed temperature-wise or anything throughout the days to where the snow would get heavier or anything. And then they happened so close to each other. So I didn't think about that until after we were talking about it a few days later. And it really could have just been the skeptical side of me says, okay, well, yeah, probably just got lucky, the trees broke. Then the other side of me says, well, wait a minute, we were in Mount Rainier National Forest after dark, and we were hiking down a road, and we heard two trees snap. Coincidence? I don't know. I probably will never know, but that's the most recent experience I've had. I guess we'll keep going out there and trying to see if we can find something.
Right on. Yeah, thanks for telling the story, man. And for the audience listening, if you're new to the whole subject, one of the typical sort of signs of Bigfoot that has been attested to by Native American legends and folklore, as well as the early settlers here in North America, as well as plenty, I would say even more so today. The idea, when trees will break and make that loud snap, that sometimes this is different than a wood knock. So like these are different things that get attributed to Sasquatch, and it's usually when you're out in the forest and you hear just this really loud tree, just like as if it's being snapped in half, like we would do to a toothpick, but they're pretty big saplings or trunks of trees that are just getting broke like that. The other thing that I mentioned right there was before that was the whole wood knock thing, which is another phenomenon that's attributed to Bigfoot is the when people will hear kind of like a baseball bat being smacked up against a tree. Now, that's not what Cooper heard. He says that, he heard the tree breaks. I agree with Cooper. I mean, we can't ever know for sure, but to me, when I think about the odds of two trees happening to break naturally, even if they are covered in snow, two very loud snaps like that, two big trees breaking within that small amount of time just seems very slim to me. And so it makes you wonder if there could have been more to it, especially since Mount Rainier, that whole area, is known for Bigfoot sightings and has been for centuries. So Cooper, when this was all happening, other than the feeling of it being silent, did you ever feel like you were being watched, or was that not something you ever felt?
I didn't really feel that. I mean, I definitely at one point I ended up behind the group. I was in the back because we were taking turns breaking the trail because of the snow, and I kept hearing something like kept saying like, look behind you, and I kept looking, and I didn't look long enough because I kept freaking myself out. And every time I looked, I was expecting to see something standing on the road or something run across the road. I never saw anything. And it could just be my own mind, because at a certain point, I was definitely thinking about it. I was thinking about all the encounter stories I've heard, and trying to picture that in my own mind, like what does it even look like? I remember we stopped to use the bathroom. I remember like shining my light up this hillside into the trees, and I was just picturing what it'd be like to see something standing up there or like looking at me. So I definitely had myself spooked a little bit. But other than that, I didn't really have that feeling. Gotcha.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I feel like when most rational people, when you're out at night in the forest where it's dark, and for those who aren't aware, the Pacific Northwest, it gets dark at night, because when you're out in the forest of the PNW and it's winter especially, like, it gets to a point where you can barely see your hand in front of your face. It gets so dark. And so if you're a rational person, there's a small amount of fear, at least, that creeps in, and so therefore, could it be attributed to Sasquatch? Sure. But like, it's also just a creepy environment to be in general, at night, so yeah, that's I feel like any story that could have to do with this subject is worth telling, because the more evidence we have of this, the better, if we're ever going to try and figure out fully what these things are, So thanks for telling it there, Cooper. And anything that you wanted to mention, any other little details of the story before we close out for the night?
No, I'm just excited to see where the rest of this goes and see what kind of information we can share with people and experiences and stories we've heard. I feel like between us, we've got quite the wealth of experiences and knowledge. So.
Right on. I totally agree. I feel like that's why I'm wanting to bring you on to be my future co-host more often, because two heads are better than one, and figuring this stuff out is a lot of fun. So I think we're gonna close out for tonight's episode. But thanks so much for being on, dude.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, that is it for tonight. Looking forward to episode 5.
Thanks for listening to the BLC. Be sure to subscribe and share. And it would be really awesome if you'd be willing to take just a minute to give us a review, as that helps this show out a ton.